Here and we are live.
Okay, so hello everyone. I have the pleasure to keep teaching this course online. And as I said before, I'm trying to do with lemons a lemonade. And as we are all virtual, we can have big names talking about Agile to us. And today we're going to have Scott Ambler, and he's the vice president and chief scientist of Disciplined Agile at PMI and co-creator of Disciplined Agile. And Scott leads the evolution of Disciplined Agile Toolkit, and is the author of a lot of very interesting books. Personal opinion, to write a book, it's a big challenge, and to have 20 very successful books, it's outstanding. So please, Scott.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So thank you for inviting me. I don't know if you caught the conversation earlier, but I've been to Brazil many times since the mid-90s and love going there, and hope to eventually I can start going back again. So as you heard, I'm the chief scientist behind Dysbinagel. My organization, Dysbinagel, was purchased by PMI a little over a year ago in August of 2019. So myself and Mark Lyons had formed this toolkit, and I'll talk a little bit about what that's all about. And we've been building it up over the years. And so one of the things that I think you'll find different is in DA we don't tell you what to do, we tell you what to think about. And we give you options. And this is a very different proposition than what you've probably seen in some of the frameworks such as Scrum and SAFe and others. And those are great, don't get me wrong. But all I'm saying is that we're taking a different approach. And I suspect that, particularly as you become more experienced in Agile, you'll find that you'll naturally want to have choices and you will act on those choices. So anyway, I just want to work through three topics, as you can see here. The first one is, what is DA? And I should also mention, so these slides, I've made a PDF of an exact copy of these slides available to you. So you don't have to madly take notes or try to keep up with the pictures, or like drawing the pictures, I guess. So I'll very briefly talk about what is DA. Then I'll do a deep dive into it, and then I'm gonna work through how do you choose your way of working? How do you apply the toolkit to develop a fit-for-purpose approach for your situation? Because every person, every team, every organization is unique, and you face unique challenges, and the situation changes, as we know. So how do you develop a fit-for-purpose approach that works for you? And at the same time, we don't want to go to the extreme of, well, I got to figure everything out on my own because we're unique. Well, even though you're unique, you face challenges, like a unique combination of challenges that are similar to challenges that have been faced by other people before. So we can stand on their shoulders. We can learn from their experiences if you can find the information. And if you have the humility to know that this is almost always the case, that you are dealing with problems that other people have solved. And if you can apply the right solution to the situation that you face, and how do you run that experience. So I'm gonna walk through what that means, and then I'll open the floor up for questions. So what is Dysbinagel? Dysbinagel is a toolkit. It's not a framework. And the main difference is where the frameworks tell you what to do, they often prescribe, and they're desperate to avoid the word prescription, and yet they tend to be very prescriptive. We instead tell you what to think about. So, and we give you options, and we help you to choose the right strategies for you in your situation. Because the problem with these defined frameworks is that they solve a certain problem, which is great. If you have that problem and if you successfully apply that toolkit, or that framework, I should say, then great, you solve the problem. But if you misapply it, or once you do succeed at that with that framework, then they don't really have anything more for you. So, and other than rhetoric, you'll hear that certain frameworks are the art of the possible, or yes, of course you can do anything you want with this framework, but you have to figure it out on your own. And they give you no advice for how to evolve past the framework. how to work your way out of method jail. And why would they? That's a bad business proposition. How helping you to move away from the framework they've just sold you, that they just sold you on. It doesn't make any sense. So, but in DA we take a different approach. So, in many ways, where the frameworks give you a fish, they feed you for a day. Dysbinagel is all about how to teach you how to fish and feed yourself for life, and I think you'll see that as we get into it. And this is a different proposition, and it's a little more complicated than what you'll see in some of the frameworks. But just like it's different. It's easy to buy fish, a little harder to know how to fish and clean a fish and then cook it yourself. That's the main difference. Right? There's a little more complexity involved in being able to fend for yourself. So Dysbinagel is an umbrella over Agile and Lean and even traditional. The traditional community has done some very good things that we can leverage. So there's hundreds, if not thousands, of practices out there, and the interesting questions become: which practices should you use? When should you do them? How do they fit together? To what extent should you do them? When should you not do some of these practices? Because there's no such thing as a best practice. That's marketing rhetoric. Any given practice, any given strategy works well in some situations and is a spectacularly bad idea in others. And so what you need to do is take these techniques off the shelf and combine them into your own way of working. So just like, if you cook, then you go to the grocery, you go to the market, and you buy ingredients. And then you combine those ingredients to form your dinner, right? You cook your own dinner, and then tomorrow you get other ingredients and you cook another dinner. And this is the way it works. So it's the same sort of thing. So how do where do you go for these techniques, and how do they fit together, and how do you cook up something that makes sense for your situation? So these pictures here. I'm at the top. Mark Lyons is the gentleman in the middle, and Al Shalloway. One of the things that PMI did, not only did they buy my organization, Dysbinagel, they also bought Net Objectives. And what we've been doing over the last year or so is combining the flex methodology from Al and his organization into Dysbinagel, and you'll see what that's like in a few minutes. But how do you address value streams, and how do you scale Agile effectively are interesting questions that Flex can help to answer. So, and as I said, you'll see how they're embedded in. So when we talk about scaling in Dysbinagel, we talk about it in two ways. The first technique is, how do we tactically scale Agile? So how does an Agile team address the complexities that they face? So we often think of scaling to mean, how do you deal with large team size? And that's certainly the case. And frameworks like Less and Safe and others clearly deal with that problem, and that's important. But we have other issues. Like, so how about the way we distribute our workforce? So like a year ago, many Agile coaches would have told you that to be Agile, you need to be co-located. And that if you weren't co-located, you weren't really Agile. And then COVID hit. And suddenly, everybody's telling you, oh, yes, it's possible to do remote Agile, and let me help you do it. So, welcome to grown-up land is my response to that. So in Dysbinagel, we had always recognized that, geographic distribution or workforce distribution, where are your people in the world, is a scaling factor. And yes, it's nice to be co-located, but you can still be Agile and be globally distributed, which we are now all learning the hard way, which is good. Other scaling factors are organization distribution. Are multiple organizations involved? You might be, outsourcing or partnering with other people. How available are the skills? Do you actually have the skills right now to do the job, or do you have to acquire them somehow? How much regulatory compliance do you face? How difficult is the problem, the domain complexity that you're facing? And of course, how challenging is the solution that you're putting together? So, for those of you in the software space, that I hope it's much easier to write brand new software from scratch using new technologies and new tooling and good stuff like that. Much more difficult if you have several platforms to to work with, or older technologies and legacy data and legacy systems that you have to enhance or integrate with. Much more challenging. So, and that's the reality on the ground for most software development, is we're dealing with legacy. We're not, very few people get to do brand new, greenfield development. So, and the point here is that the further out you are on these vertices, the more challenging the problem that you face, the greater the risk that you face, and the different the way that you'll work. So a small team works differently than a big team. A team taking on a simple problem works differently than a team taking on a hard problem. These are inherent things that we know. So different teams in different situations will work in different ways. And so we need to be flexible enough to address the situation that we face. What's interesting is when I show this chart to executives, and I've been doing that for years, the only response I've ever gotten is, "Oh, we've got all of this." And so the point is that a given framework, any framework, will be geared to solve a certain combination of these scaling factors. So, less, for example, is geared to support teams of 100-ish people, and it does that very well. But if you've only got a single team of 5 people, less is not the way to go. Simply isn't, right? It's overkill for what you have to do. Scrum would probably be a better strategy for you. So use the right strategy for the right situation. The other aspect of scaling, and which others are now actively trying to get into and are getting into, is business agility. So how do we scale strategically? How do we bring Agile across the entire organization? Because it's not just about software development. Software development is certainly important, but it's only one part of the overall thing that organizations do. So the rest of the organization needs to also become more effective and choose to improve. So for those of you who have been working in the in various organizations, I'm sure you've run into problems around how are software development teams financed. So if the finance folks don't understand Agile, they will inflict a reasonably ineffective strategy on your team and add risk and add pain to your team because they don't know how to interact and work in an Agile manner. So these are important things to consider. So the toolkit has 4 layers to it. The first is what we call the foundation layer. This is where the mindset is. This is where basic concepts of Agile and Lean, and even Serial, like I said earlier, this is really a hybrid where we adopt ideas from a wide range of sources, including more traditional techniques, and of course roles and responsibilities, and how do you choose your way of working. So these are all foundational skills, none of which has anything to do with software development. So we've taken the great stuff out of Agile software and Lean and other strategies and made it clear. So we put this foundation together. The next layer up, is discipline DevOps. So this is where software development, discipline Agile delivery in this case, lands, as well as security and data management. So our approach to DevOps is a little more robust than classic DevOps. So because we're answering questions, how do you make this work in enterprise class situations? So how does DevSecOps fit in? How does database DevOps fit in? How do you do release management when you have hundreds or thousands of teams in flight? Because it's not just this, people just put into production whatever they want, whenever they want. When you have a couple thousand teams developing, there's got to be some coordination, and you certainly don't want 1,000 teams figuring out how to do CI. That's just stupid, right? You really do need to support that somehow and have some common tooling and support and all good sort of stuff. So, anyways, we have a robust view of how do you approach DevOps. The next layer up, based on that, is value streams. So how do we bring value to our customers? So a value stream starts, ends, and then continues with a customer. And how does that entire value stream work? And I've got a diagram coming up on that. And this is covering all aspects of the value stream. And then finally, how does the rest of the organization work? So how can we help finance become more effective? How can we help vendor management become more effective? For those of you who have worked in local corporations, you've probably run into procurement being less than effective. So this is a problem. How can the HR folks, the people management folks, work in an agile manner, become better at what they do. So in Discipline Agile, we help organizations to truly become agile businesses and agile organizations. And we, and this is hard. And this is, so we provide advice across the board. So let's do a little more deep dive into how we actually pull this off. So we've architected Discipline Agile into 4 views or 4 aspects. The first one is, of course, mindset. What does it mean to work in this Discipline Agile manner? And I'll explore the mindset in a minute. And many people will tell you that the key thing is to be agile, and certainly mindset's important, but you also need to know how to do agile as well. And this often gets left out of some of the messaging from some people. And because if you've got an agile mindset but you don't have the skills to do the job, I'm sorry, but you're useless. You're just useless. And it's as simple as that. So you've got to have the mindset, and you've also got to have the skill set as well, or the ability to gain the skill set in a reasonably quick manner. So having said that, we also have to be concerned about people issues. So what are the roles and responsibilities? What are the team structures that we can possibly have? What are the practices? What are the strategies that we follow? And how do we find them? So, if you believe my claim that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of strategies out there, and in the DEA toolkit, we have over 700 identified. So I know there's many, many hundreds. And I also know that we're missing a lot. So thousands is probably realistic. So how do you find them? That's an interesting question that needs to be answered. And it's not just, we'll just go to Google and search for it, because you don't even know the terms to search. That is a hardcore reality in the vast majority of organizations. The people are dealing with problems, and if they know to go search for help, they don't even know what to search on in many cases. So that's a bit of a problem, which I think we've solved. So, and then flow. So how, what are the processes that we follow? What are the workflows? What are the life cycles? Because different teams will work in different ways. So let's dive down into each one of these aspects. So this is a summary of the DA mindset. We used to have it based on the Agile Manifesto, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. And the Agile Manifesto is a great start, but there's a few challenges with it. It's software focused, and as you just saw in previous slides, Agile is about far more than just software, but it's also 20 years old. And frankly, we've learned a few things in the last 20 years, or almost 20 years, I should say. And so for a long time, we had been in DA, we had chosen to extend the Agile Manifesto. We called it the Discipline Agile Manifesto, but we found it too constraining. So about a year ago now, we stepped back and we just said, enough is enough. We need to rethink the way we communicate the mindset. And this is what we came up with. So the basic idea is that we believe in this collection of principles, some of which are very clearly lean and not just agile. And because we believe in these principles, we'll make promises to ourselves and to the people that we work with. Promises like embracing diversity and psychological safety, and having a sustainable pace, so keeping our workloads within capacity, for example. So some of these ideas are agile, some of them are lean, and some of them are just smart, good things to do because we're good people. And because we make these promises, in order to fulfill them, we follow these guidelines. So we do things like we recognize that in order to change the culture of this, in order to change our culture, we really need to improve our system. So for management, for the leaders among us, that's their job, right? It's their job to build environments that enable teams, enable their people to be successful and to learn and to grow and to get better. We want to adopt measures to improve outcomes and good stuff like that. So there's a lot of really good ideas there, and all this stuff is online, by the way. But anyways, and like I said, you've got the slides. We also support roles. So many of you are probably familiar with the product owner role and team members and good stuff like that. But one of the things that we do in DA, and this is for a software development team, a Discipline Agile delivery team. And one of the things that we do in DA is we look at the whole picture. And when you're doing software development, the whole picture is a little more than what Scrum folks talk about, a little more than what XP talks about. It really is, how do you address technical issues? How do you get the job done? So what we've done is we've adopted roles, and a product owner, we adopted from Scrum because it's a fairly good idea. There's actually better ideas to interact with your customers, with your stakeholders, and going through a product owner. But all in all, product owners are pretty good. One of our roles is called team lead. We don't call it Scrum Master, and that often shocks people because they've been inundated by the Scrum marketing rhetoric. But if you were to choose to stand back and work in an empirical manner to observe things, it's pretty easy to observe that, yes, maybe an Agile Scrum team needs a Scrum Master. Okay, fair enough. A project team might need a project manager. A sales team might need a sales manager. This is pretty easy to observe if you choose to. And so as a result, now those are all still leads. They're the leads of those various teams I just talked about, but they're different, they're different positions, they're different roles. And we need to recognize that. So what happens is when you take a more robust view of how to apply Agile, you end up having to deal with some very interesting issues of how the heck do we describe how do you lead a team when very clearly different types of teams have different types of leaders. We also explicitly have an architecture owner. This is a role from Agile modeling. They own the solution. They guide the team in coming up with the solution, just like the product owner is the voice of the customer. The architecture owner is the voice of the solution. And we use the term stakeholder. So, we go back and forth. We'll use the term customer in some cases. In this case, though, particularly from the point of view of a team, they have stakeholders. It's not just customers. So and yes, you have customers, I hope, but you also have auditors. So they're not a customer, but they are a stakeholder in what you do. There's senior managers, there's support people, there's infrastructure people, there's operations people. They're all stakeholders, but they're not really direct customers of what you're building. So we really do need to, so this is one of the traditional concepts that we adopted because they really sort of nailed it. We also talk about the concept of supporting roles. This is, as needed, if needed, to the extent needed. So particularly when you start scaling, remember that spider diagram, when you start going out on the different vertices, some of these supporting roles become critical. So for example, even though I'm a firm believer in whole team testing, having all the testing being done by the team, it's observably not true that that's sufficient in all situations. So for example, for those of you who have worked in life-critical situations, by law, you have to have some of your testing outside of your team. They cannot, by law, be part of your team in order to keep you honest. So there's good reasons for independent testing in some cases. That doesn't mean that all of your testing is independent, but some certainly is. And any given team, if I run into a hard technical problem, I might bring in a technical expert, for a couple of days to help us through, like a security person, for example. The product owners don't know everything about the domain. That's completely naive. So they've got to bring in domain experts, subject matter experts to help explain things and to work through hard problems. So there's different reasons to bring on these different supporting roles, and that's perfectly fine. Then, of course, it's not just about software development, right? So, we have different types of roles across the organization. So, each and every one of those hexes, if you remember that diagram before with all those various hexes on it, those are called process blades. So, finance, for example, is one. Each one of those hexes has several, one or more specific roles. So, there's several roles specific to finance. There's several roles specific to portfolio management, and so on. And that's perfectly fine. This is the way the world works, and this is required. So we explicitly call this out. We also believe in the fact that teams work in different teams work in different in different ways, and that's fine. And for those of you who have had the privilege to work in many organizations, or even just in one organization, but you've actually chosen to observe what the heck is going on, I'm sure you've seen that some teams are project teams. I'm sure you've also seen that some teams are not project teams. You've probably seen that some teams are following some sort of Agile Scrum thing. I'm sure you've seen some teams following some sort of a lean Kanban-y thing. You might have gotten to see large programs. You might have seen some sort of lean startup exploratory thing as well. Different teams in different situations work in different ways. So instead of inflicting one single way on people, so Scrum inflicts one way. They have one life cycle. And that's a good life cycle, but it's not applicable in all situations, as the Kanban people will tell you. And I'm sure you've all heard various arguments of Kanban versus Scrum and all that good stuff. And the answer is use the right technique in the right situation. It's not, my life cycle can beat up your life cycle. That's naive. So, it's really, all about do the right thing in the situation. So we support an Agile Scrum-based project life cycle. We support an Agile Scrum-based continuous delivery life cycle, more of a Devops type of an approach. We support a lean Kanban-based project life cycle. We support a lean Kanban-based continuous delivery, like not project life cycle, more along the lines of DevOps. We support an exploratory approach based on lean startup. We also support a team of teams approach based on just doing it right. They're very similar to less, by the way, but with a few key differences. One of the key differences is we don't prescribe the fact that the sub teams have to work in the same way. So some of the frameworks say, some of the scaling frameworks say all the teams need to be following a Scrum-based approach, or all the teams need to be doing 2-week sprints and 3-month releases. And those are good ideas, but might not be good ideas for you. And there's other ways to work. So we support that. Do the right thing in the situation you face. So this is the Agile project-based life cycle based on Scrum, as you can see. You can see Scrum in the middle there. One of the things we've done is we've normalized some of the terminology. When you support, because Dysbinagel takes great ideas from a very wide range of sources and then puts them in context, you've got to be very careful about your terminology, because not everybody uses the Scrum terminology, for example. Many people do, but not everybody. And the challenge with the Scrum terminology is great, but it puts you in the Scrum mindset. And what we found is that it's very difficult for people to get out of that mindset. Just like it was difficult for people to get into it, now it's difficult to get out of it. So we purposely don't use the Scrum terminology, because we want to give the Scrum people a wake-up call that we can do better than Scrum. You can choose to do better, and here's how. So we can help them do that. So anyway, so we use slightly different terminology, and that's okay. But if you want to use Scrum terminology, good for you. So a couple interesting things about this diagram. So first of all, it's a project-based life cycle. So you see 3 phases, because projects go through phases. Along the bottom, you see lightweight risk-based milestones. One of the reasons why we do that is because teams are going to be governed. Senior leadership in your organizations will govern your teams. They'll make financing decisions for you. They will monitor what you're doing. They will hopefully guide and help you if they're good at governance. But they got and there's fiduciary reasons for this, but there's also just good management reasons for this. So you deserve to be governed well, and I appreciate that that can be hard to imagine sometimes, but you really do deserve to be governed well. So we show you how to do that in DA, because one of the challenges that with Agile is, in particular with the message that different teams will work in different ways given their situation, and their way of working will evolve over time because they own their process. That's a fundamental concept from extreme programming, as we know. That really freaks management out, because they have to keep an eye on things. They have to guide you. They have to lead you. This is their job. And when you tell them, well, yeah, you've got like 1,000 teams under you and they're all working differently, it blows their minds. And their reaction will be to inflict inappropriate governance upon you. So we've answered the question, here's how you can allow your teams to do their own thing, but still govern effectively. And here's these lightweight, and it's not just this nonsense you've probably heard that, oh, if senior management wants to know what's going on in my team, all they've got to do is show up for our stand-up meeting. What a load of hooey. Come on. I've got 15 teams under me right now. How the heck can I appear in 15 stand-up meetings at the same time? And even if I show up for one stand-up meeting each day, it's still, I'm only get 15 minutes of the status every 2 weeks. That's nonsense. Come on. Doesn't work. So anyways, and it's of course far more about governance than just that anyways. Another interesting thing to see is on the outside edges, you see these hexes, these process blades. So we explicitly show how there's that this team interacts with other aspects of the organization, at least in this case, now at this level, at high level, because that's the way it goes. That's the way it is, right? As a team, what we produce will eventually get operated and supported in production. We might be the team doing it, we might not be, but somebody's going to end up doing it. So we should do it well, and we should make sure that we understand those are our stakeholders and other good reasons. So anyways, this is the Agile project-based life cycle. This is the Agile continuous delivery life cycle, also based on Scrum, a lot closer to the Scrum life cycle you're probably familiar with. But once again, you see a common set of risk-based milestones on the bottom there. Some of the milestones that you saw on this slide don't apply on this slide because of the lack of phases. But similar concept. We still have these external other groups that we're interacting with to get the job done, and that's okay. So different types of life cycle, and there's, as I said, there's a Kanban-based one and Kanban-based life cycles and so on. So choose your right life cycles. And this slide is basically summarizing what I was talking about with the lightweight milestones. So even though the teams are working differently, we can have a consistent, lightweight, fit-for-purpose approach to governance, which allows leadership to do the right thing, to actually lead and govern effectively and not inflict pain and risk and cost on the teams to do so. So this is a huge benefit for organizations. And frankly, it's not well addressed by any of the Agile frameworks yet. This is the DA Flex life cycle. So how does a value stream work? So if you remember, earlier I talked about different layers of the value stream. Well, this is the flow. So it begins and ends and continues with customers. We go through various aspects. So in a smaller organization, this could be one team doing all these activities. In a very large organization, this could be multiple teams collaborating together. Either way, you want to streamline this workflow. You want to be as effective as possible. A couple interesting things here for the managers and leaders among us. This is all about measurement. So we allow our strategies and our measures and to drive our decisions. We work in what's called minimum business increments. You may have heard of a term called minimum viable product, popularized by Lean Startup. Roughly about 90 to 95% of the people that use that term use it inappropriately. An MVP is for experiments. It is not for the real system. Minimum business increments, sometimes called minimum releases or minimum viable releases, are the real system that you're producing for your customers. MVPs are experiments, very different, that you use to learn. Very important, but not the real system. Another interesting approach that tends to blow the project managers' minds is that you don't realize value until something is in the hands of a customer and they tell you that it's valuable. You don't tell them that it's valuable to them. They tell you, yeah, I got value. I love this. I got value out of this. This is important to me. So it's realized value by the customer. That's when you've actually earned value. So that's a different mindset for many of your PMs, perhaps. So how do we apply this in practice? So I'll very briefly go through this, and then I'll start taking questions. So a couple of interesting points I want to make. So when you adopt frameworks, let's assume that you're adopting a framework like Scrum or Less or Safe or whatever, and which is a good idea. And we're going to assume that it worked out well for you. We're going to assume you're successful. So when you adopt this, and yes, sometimes it's not successful, but I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to assume you do it successfully. So when you do it successfully, there's always a learning curve. You got to get training and coaching, and it takes it takes your team a bit of time to figure this new way of working out. But then, things quickly get better, and you're successful. And then what happens is you hit the limits of the framework. So Scrum solves a certain problem. So once you've solved that problem, it doesn't have anything else, it doesn't have much left to tell you. Safe solves a certain problem, and once you've solved that problem, there's not much left there. And like I said, there's all this hand waving and all this rhetoric, but they don't give you advice to move away from the framework. Why would they? That'd be a goofy thing to do. That's bad. That would be a bad business strategy. So they don't do it. And I can't blame them, rightfully so. So the question is how much better did things get? How high up is that curve? And there's all this wonderful rhetoric of, I'm sure you've heard that you can do things in, twice the amount of work and half the time and all this wonderful rhetoric. but you can't trust any of it, right? You can't trust the gurus telling you how awesome their stuff is. You got to go to the researchers. So luckily, there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Don Reifer, and he's been studying Agile for years now. He actually did his PhD studying Agile. So he has a very large set of data, which is growing constant. This is a bit out of date now. But what he's found, and the interesting thing about him is he doesn't have an axe to grind. He's not a safe guy. He's not a discipline Agile guy, not a Scrum guy, not an XP guy, just a researcher. And he's asking the question, well, how effective is this Agile stuff in practice? And what he's finding is, yeah, on average, it's working. So some people are doing better and some people are doing worse. But on average, these are the types of numbers that he's seeing. So it's working out, but it's not this, 10 times productivity promises that we're hearing. And sure, I have seen some spectacular improvements in productivity by adopting Agile. Well, it appears that it was because of adopting Agile. But the thing is, those teams were so messed up, doing anything would have helped dramatically improve what they were doing, right? So we got to be honest about what's happening here. And luckily, Dr. Reifer has been doing a pretty good job here, and he publishes and all that good sort of stuff. And like I said, he doesn't have an axe to grind. So that's the interesting thing. So if we're not seeing the dramatic improvement that we get promised by these frameworks, well, how the heck do organizations get really good? So I run executive workshops, and one of the things that I like to do is I do this I do this exercise where I go to the executives and I say, so what are the companies, who are your competitors? And so we get and who are your potential competitors as well, right? Because we write them up on stickies, put them on the wall. Then the next step is, okay, now that we've identified either your existing competitors or potential competitors, I want you to rank them, and I want you to separate them into two categories: the competitors that you're not worried about, and the competitors that keep you up at night. They're really scary companies that you don't want to, that you really don't want to have to compete against because you think you're going to lose. So then they move the stickies around. So then the next question, and so then we look at the stickies, and the companies that they're scared of are exactly the ones that you would predict. It's like Amazon and eBay and Google, all of these really effective, really good companies. Many of these companies which are doing phenomenally well during COVID because they were able to react and pivot and change their approach. Right? These are the scary ones. So how did they get scary? And then the question I ask, and this is, I get a lot of chuckles when I do this, is, so of these companies, which ones do you think are adopting Agile frameworks? And they all laugh and they point to the companies that they're not scared of. Then I ask, so how the heck did Amazon get so scary? Well, it's because they do continuous improvement. They take responsibility for their way of working. They care about their effectiveness. And what they do, and this is a technique that's been around for decades. It's a lean technique, and you might have heard it called Kaizen, or continuous improvement, or total quality management. So what they do is they realize, hey, we got something we want to improve. So they identify potential ways to improve it. They also identify how they're going to measure it. Then they experiment with these strategies. They try them out. They give them long enough to either succeed or not succeed. Then they assess their effectiveness. And if it worked out well, they adopt it. If it didn't work out well, they abandon it. And if they're polite, they share their learnings at least within their company, and then they continue on. So they constantly improve in small steps. This is called a strategy called Kaizen. Improve in do small improvements. And because they've been doing this for years, they're really good. This is why there's nothing special about Amazon other than the fact that they decided to get good. They decided to improve. And because they've been doing it for so long now, they're way ahead of everybody else. That's why they're scary. There's nothing else. That's the only reason. And eBay, same story. And it's interesting. If you read these case studies and you read the books about these companies, the stories are all the same. And this is basically the story. So the question is how can we do better? Well, first of all, why aren't we doing this? And second, can we do even better than this? And the answer is yes, we can. So the observation that I make is that sometimes these experiments fail. So we try out these new techniques, and sometimes it just didn't work out. It just, we couldn't make it work. Great idea, didn't work for us, whatever, right? Just didn't work out. And, you know, and we learn something, and the consultants will tell you, well, we'll learn fast. You know, we'll fail fast, right? Which is certainly better than failing slowly, but it's still failure. And let me tell you, if you're the person paying the bill for all these failures, the last thing you want to hear is some kid telling you that you can fail fast. Nobody wants to hear that, right? It's like, yeah, sure, whatever, fetch me a coffee. That's the response that I hear from the senior executives sometimes. They don't want to hear this crap anymore. Failing fast is still failing. So can we succeed earlier? That's the question. So where's the problem in this process? Well, the real problem in this process is that second step, where we identify potential techniques. So if we can get better at identifying strategies that might work for us in the situation that we face, we'll have less failures. You're still going to fail. You're only human, but you can fail less often. And the secret to this is if you have the humility to recognize that even though you're unique, you still face problems that have been solved by others in the past. So if we can leverage their learnings, then we will get better at choosing strategies that we can experiment with. So how do you do that? Well, you know, if you have access to an agile coach that's been there and done that, then they can probably give you advice. But do you have it? Do you have that? Can you afford them? Can you find them? That's a problem. But yeah, don't get me wrong, I'm a firm believer in coaching. You can also do this if you've access to some sort of process knowledge base, something like the Dysbinagel toolkit. And certainly a coach with access to the Dysbinagel toolkit is probably even better. Oh, it is better. I know that for a fact. So that's the idea. So how do we pull this off? So let's work through an example. And so this is something we call guided continuous improvement. So in DA, the technique of guided continuous improvement, it's all about, can we improve that second step? Can we help you to get better at identifying strategies that are most likely going to work for you in the situation that you face with the team that you currently have? Okay, so how do we do that? This diagram is a summary of what we call the process goals for team agility. So these are the types of activities, the types of process goals or outcomes that you need to achieve as a team in order to be successful. So in this example that I want to work through, we've got a problem where we have an existing product that's in the marketplace, and we even though we're very good at understanding what our existing customers want, we're not very good at gaining new customers. So we add features that our existing customers like, but it's not attracting new people. So we're not growing our market. So this is seen as a problem because we want to make more money. So we have people on the team that are familiar with the toolkit, and they realize, you know what, we got a problem here with the way that we explore scope. How are we going about exploring requirements, exploring what our potential customers want? So we got a problem here. So if I've got an experienced agile coach on my team, or just some experienced people on the team in general, they might know how to solve this problem. But let's assume that's not our case. We think of it, heck if I know. We've been struggling with this for months, and we don't know. So we can dive down to the next level of detail. This is what's called a goal diagram. Now, if you've got some reasonably experienced people on the team, at least reasonably experienced in this sort of a problem, then this level of information is probably enough to give them an idea, because it's basically a checklist now. Oh yeah, the technique we really need here is this. Let's experiment with this, and that could be the amount of information they need. But let's assume that's unfortunately not the case. So we talk about it, and we're going to say we're in a retrospective, right? We talk about it as, you know what? The real problem here is we don't know how to explore how people are going to use our solution, right? We're good at exploring it with real customers, but with potential customers, we don't really know what the heck we're doing. So, so we look at this diagram and say, wow, there's a bunch of techniques there. It's not just about the user stories and epics that everybody talks about. There's other strategies. How about that? Maybe we should dive down to the next level of detail. So we go to the toolkit. And this is in printed form, in the form of a book. It's also digital online. So if you have, if you're a Dysbinagel member, you have access to the digital version. Otherwise, you can read this in your Choose Your Raw book. So we go to the book, or we go to the online tool. In this case, this is a screen capture of a book page, and we go and look at it, and we realize, you know what? Look, there's a bunch of options here for exploring usage. And so we look at the descriptions, and they're brief enough to give you an idea of what the techniques are. And we realize, you know what, personas sound like they would work for us. I think we could do this. Now we might need more details, and if so, then there's references that you can go look at. But let's say this is enough of a, we're at the level now that we've finally figured it out. But what's interesting is not only do we tell you what the technique's all about, we also tell you what are the trade-offs, what are the advantages and disadvantages of each of these techniques. So now we can make an intelligent decision, because we've got a bunch of options here. Which options are best suited for you to experiment with in the situation that you face? Well, I don't know what situation you're in. I don't know about the people on your team. I don't know about your skills. So I can't tell you the best practice. I just can't. But what I can do is I can say, you know what? Here's a bunch of proven techniques. Here are the trade-offs of those techniques. You decide, because you know your scenario, you know what situation you're in. You can make a better informed decision. So chances are pretty good personas are going to work for you in your situation. You still got to try them out. You still got to experiment with them, because you don't know for sure, right? You could still make a mistake, but you're less likely to make a mistake because you've got a little bit of guidance now. Okay, and like I said, if you had an experienced coach, as soon as I described that scenario, an experienced coach would have said, yeah, we should be writing up personas. But if that wasn't your situation, you would have been really out of luck, because you might not even have known what language to use to go search for these sorts of techniques. You'd be completely at the mercy of whatever you stumbled into or made up. And that's why for continuous improvement alone, this is why there's a lot of failures, more failures than we need. So here's another example of a goal diagram. This is more technically oriented. So for the programmers among us, you'll be familiar with some of these techniques. Maybe not familiar with all of them, but that's okay. So there's lots of choices. This is another technically oriented goal diagram. In this case, what are some of the strategies that we use to accelerate value delivery? Some different types of testing, different approaches to software configuration management, different approaches to deployment. So some of the more technical, boring topics in software development, all important, just not not quite so sexy as programming and TDD and good stuff like that. And that's okay. This is the improved quality goal diagram. In this case, there's options for how do we improve the quality of our work. So it's about more than just refactoring code. There's different approaches to refactoring, as I hope you all know. And it's not just about improving the software stuff either. It's about improving other aspects of deliverables as well. And if we're really smart, we reuse as much as possible, because the less I have to develop, the less I have to maintain. So I end up with greater reuse. Greater levels of reuse lead to greater levels of quality, if we know what we're doing. So anyways, a lot of good options there. So why is this important? So we saw earlier the S curve of adopting frameworks, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. That's nothing wrong with getting a 7 to 12% productivity improvement. Why wouldn't you want to do that? That's good, but just understand it's limited. That's okay, right? Get the benefit out of it you can, and then move on. With continuous improvement, you see an improvement curve that looks like this, and it's actually jagged, right? Because some of the experiments fail, but you get an improvement curve that looks like that. And then finally, with guided continuous improvement, you get a steeper improvement curve. And this is basic math. With if you fail less often, you succeed more often, and you improve faster. It's really that basic. So being a little bit smarter about the way you run your experiments can lead to a better improvement path. And this is exactly what I hope you want. And that's what Dysbinagel is all about. So our philosophy is start where you are. So whatever you're doing today, that's what you're doing today. Good for you. Hopefully do the best that you can in the situation that you face, and then improve in place. Always strive to get better. Improve upon what you're currently doing. And that's exactly what these scary organizations, the Amazons and the Googles, have been doing for years. So let's do it better than them. Why not? So time for questions.
Thank you very much for your really amazing presentation. So time for questions. If someone wants to write in Portuguese, we can translate, and otherwise you can talk in English also.
Okay.
Kainan, go ahead, please.
You said sometimes you get companies that the CEOs don't like to have to change their methods to Agile to accept the failure. What do you do in these circumstances?
Yeah, so when you're helping organizations to transform and improve, you have to engage with the executives. So if you're just engaging with teams at the team level, that's good for the team, but these teams aren't autonomous. That's one of the great myths of Agile. Every given team interacts with other teams. We rely on finance to fund the team, for example. We rely on senior management to guide and to lead and to govern, like it or not. So if the executives don't understand Agile, you've got a serious problem there. So you need to interact, you need to engage with them. So you need to help them, help educate them, and help coach them. So you need part of the overall transformation effort has to be that you have some executive coaching, and you have to help them understand. So one of the things that I do, when I see leaders that struggle with this idea that teams have to experiment to learn, they get really fearful if they think, well, everybody has to do all this at once. No, let's just run a few experiments, right? Let's try it out. Let's try this technique out on a couple of teams. Don't force it on your 1,000 teams. Let's just try it with a few teams and see how it works. Prove it out in your environment. And then they can see that it's not threatening. But they also don't want, because the problem with the word experiment is it sounds like you're fooling around. And very often you are. And to be fair, you often are. And so they really don't want to hear about this, random, let's make crap up and see what works type strategy, which is often the way a lot of the coaches sound. And often it's this way it is, right? Because when you have a coach that is dealing with issues they've never seen before, unless they're very good at hunting down help and researching things really quickly, then they're just making stuff up and they're hoping for the best. And then those are the sorts of experiments that tend to fail more often. And if you're paying the bills, nobody wants to hear that. So and the executives are smart people. They know what's going on, right? So so you need to have a coherent strategy for how we're spent. Yes, we have to experiment, and yes, some experiments will fail. That's the nature. That's just the fundamental nature of experimentation. And here's why we're experimenting. But we can be smarter about the way we identify what the things to experiment with. That's coherent to most executives.
Maybe now, Renato, you have a question?
Yes. Thanks, Scott, for the great lecture. I really enjoyed that idea of fail fast is bad, succeed earlier is better. I think that this aspect of communication is very important too. It's very interesting to see this, how the communication can influence the opinion of people about the same techniques. There was one slide where you spoke about the different roles that people can adopt, the team member, the team lead, and one of them got my attention. That is that idea of an architecture owner. And in general, in all the slides, you showed that, well, architecture has a job in the whole, and in the development phase of some of those diagrams you put, there was the idea of trying the architecture early. So if you could talk a little bit more about what is this paper, how it can influence this idea of validating the different architectures.
Yeah, so I'll bring up a couple slides. So first, so this is the process goals. So when you're taking it, and this is looking at it from the point of view of a project-based approach, but when you're early in the project, you're going to spend a little bit of time thinking through the architecture. even if it's just exploring the existing architecture. So say you're doing a package implementation, you still got to invest some time understanding what the architecture is going to be and how it fits in with your environment. But certainly if you're building something new or extending some existing thing, you're going to have to spend a little bit of time doing that. But then one of the other techniques, one of the other process goals is to prove the architecture early. And what we do there, and I'll bring up this slide, and this is basic software engineering, where what we do in order to decrease technical risk on the project, what we do is we spend the first few iterations, the first few sprints, working on the architecturally significant stories or requirements. Because what we want to do is build what's often called a walking skeleton, or the steel frame of the system that implements critical functionality, like real functionality. So you're still working vertical slices, but we're doing that. We're doing the critical stuff first to prove out that our architecture actually works, or to discover that it doesn't work. So therefore, we should rethink it. And so this is a strategy from the Rational Unified process from the early 90s, and it's actually a strategy adopted in extreme programming, mid 2000s, I guess. And other people talk about it now. Jeff Patton talks about the term of a walking skeleton, and other people. The Agile community keeps reinventing this concept every 5 years, but it's been around for a long time. And so the basic idea is that if we can prove our architecture early, and so from a software development team point of view, with working code, not just diagrams, not just with PowerPoint decks, but actual working code, then we've actually reduced the risk, the technical risk, the architectural risk on our project, and that's critical. So it's a much more mature and engineering-based way of working, and we build this right in. And it's interesting. I was just working with a large financial institution that has been doing Agile for years, and they just stumbled in on this now. And they've invited me to walk their architecture team through. Here's how this actually works in practice. So it's good to hear. But yeah, so even those techniques been around for decades. It's still new to people. And this gets back to my earlier point that if you're trying to improve the way you approach architecture in Agile, if you don't have a clue as to the history of software engineering, like architecture and software engineering, you're not going to, how the heck could you you're not going to stumble into that technique on your own. Probably not, right? So this is something that this is why you need a little bit of advice. So yeah, so there's some interesting ideas there.
Thank you.
Luciana? Oh, sorry.
Oh, thanks. So, hey, Scott, I really like your presentation. Thanks. In one of the slides, you mentioned about psychological safety and diversity. I'm curious to know which methods you use to guarantee that psychological safety is present in the teams.
Yeah, so there's great question. There's a lot of different ways you can do that, but this becomes a I don't like the word guarantee because there are no guarantees. All I can do is help you to increase the chance that that you're doing it. So first, just making you aware of it being an issue, like a critical issue, is important. But yeah, there's techniques around this. One of our workshops for becoming a senior Scrum Master, as the case may be, focuses on techniques to do exactly this. A lot of it is being aware, but also actively monitoring and like watching people's behavior from a coaching point of view, watching people's behaviors and seeing how they react, and sometimes it's very subtle in certain situations, and working with people, and yeah, so there's many coaching techniques, but there's no yeah, like I said, I don't like the word guarantee because it's hard to guarantee something like that, but you certainly want to strive and actively try to achieve it.
Okay, thanks.
code.
He got a question from Twitch or game streaming. Go ahead, John.
It's interesting because the question comes from our department's chief, Marcelo Finger. He asks, how do you coordinate development if part of your project is sent to a third party?
Yeah, great question. So let me bring up this slide. So right here, when we talk about organization distribution, so some of these people, so for example, you could have paid partners like contractors or consultants on the floor with you as part of your team. So, there's still some contracting issues there. That's pretty straightforward. The challenge then becomes what happens when you're outsourcing, for example, or what happens if you're working with another organization in some sort of a coalition partnership. And some of it is you've got to change your contracting processes. You have to, if you want to work in an agile manner, you have to contract for agile work. And that means whoever's doing procurement needs to be competent. It also means that whoever is managing this contract also needs to know how to manage it in an agile manner and govern in an agile manner. Part of it is working close with the team. So, for example, some of the work that my overall team is doing is contracted out, and to a firm in the former Soviet Union, which is different culture. Some culture differences there. But what I found was that when we first started, they wanted to have 2-week sprints. And I said, no, that is way too long. We're going to start with 1-week sprints, and then we're going to improve from there. Because I don't want you going off for 2 weeks and doing whatever. I need to have visibility. So because of the greater risk associated with outsourcing, you need greater visibility into what they're doing. In this case, it's not a software engagement. So, but say it was. So say I had outsourced some work to an organization on the other side of the planet doing software development. Part of that contract would be, I want to have, first of all, I want to have them with full monitoring of what they're doing, including code quality and other common automated metrics. I want to have access to their dashboards. I want to be able to see, I want to be able to see their work. I might not ever look at it, but I certainly want to, I would, but I certainly want access to their dashboards. And those dashboards are darn well better have quality metrics being automated in place. Because I need the visibility, because the greater the risk that you face, the greater the visibility you need to govern effectively. So that's the fundamental strategy there. So for this team that I'm outsourcing right now to Belarus, I actually have every morning my time. We now have a demo, so we're effectively working in 1-day iteration. We're still calling them iterations or sprints, but I basically motivated them to go more of a Kanban thing, and because of the risk. And so we have every day we have a demo now. I want to see what they did yesterday, and hopefully, and almost every day now, my response is, "Wow, that's really good. Release it, get it in production," which is a bit not what they were used to. So it took us a while to work up to that. But yeah, so you really do. Yeah. So I think to summarize, if you're going to work in if you want to outsource in an agile or lean manner, the onus is on the customer organization. You've got to be competent, and there's no nice way to say. I'm going to be blunt. I'm being blunt. You have to be competent. You have to, so if you don't know how to do agile, that's within the scope of your organization, you are not competent enough to do agile outsourcing. You just aren't. And even if you can do agile successfully within your own teams, you still might not be good enough to outsource, because it's harder. And what you need to start doing but you need to keep an eye, you need to govern, and you need to get constant feedback. You need visibility into what they're doing, and it needs to be a partnership too, right? You can't just treat them like slaves. It really needs to be a partnership, and they need to have a seat at the table. So they need to be prepared to push back and to to figure. And you have to negotiate the way that you're going to work together. So don't just send out an RFP and go for the lowest bidder. You might as well just flush your money now and get it over with. You really do need to work in a partnership. I actually about 3 weeks ago now, I did a webinar with the leader of the Lean Agile procurement movement. And this is on projectmanagement.com right now. It's publicly available, so you should be able to just go and do a quick search on that and find it. And they're doing some very interesting things on different ways to set up relationships and partnerships, and how to actually manage them appropriately. So it's very possible, but you've got to know what you're doing. But the first thing is going to be your procurement organization. If they don't know how to procure in an Agile, if they don't know how to procure Agile, then they won't, and then you'll get a mess, pretty much guaranteed. So anyway, it's hard. Yeah, it's possible, but hard. Get help if you can.
Thank you very much. I have a question now, looking at our diagram on the slide 7. And imagine you are working with microservice and you have the best software architect on the world. Is it going to be easier, your diagram now?
Yeah, certainly, right? So if you notice some of it will be, but it's also, but the solution complexity is still at the level of complexity, right? So what's happened here is, in order to pay down the risk of having a very complex solution, this really complicated microservices or whatever you're doing, then yeah, you have to have better people on that. And then do you have if you look at the skill available factor, do you have those people? Can you acquire them? But the other thing too, and this is going a little bit off topic, but I would be concerned still, because I still have that fundamental risk, because if we're building something that relies on this uber genius person, well, what are we going to do when that uber genius person leaves? Because they eventually will. That is a guarantee. So, and I've been in too many situations where this really smart person or this really smart team built something really cool, and then they left, or we asked them to leave. They disappeared for some reason, and suddenly we discovered we had some unmaintainable mess, and now we've got a huge problem on our hands. So, and it just might be the nature of the beast, right? Like you'll build, putting somebody on Mars is a fundamentally complex problem that's going to have a fundamentally complex solution. So yeah, you're going to throw really smart people at that problem.
Okay,
that's okay.
Thank you very much. Maybe not the last question. Renato has another question, and maybe because after it, the programmers need to keep programming, because the only way to learn agile methods, it's by doing it. So
yeah, Renato, do it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I work as a machine learning engineer, and I work with lots of data scientists, which usually are, well, professionals who come from other areas other than computer science, or don't have necessarily a training as software engineers. And I see that for them, and I at least see that as a characteristic of data science, the traditional agile frameworks, namely Scrum, often doesn't work. I don't know if it's if it's a little bit more difficult to split the work in increments or something like this. At least this has been my experience.
So my experience is different. So to be fair, they're absolutely right. Scrum has nothing to say about data. This is, neither does XP. Neither does SAFe. So data is this gaping hole in the Agile community, because it's not cool. It's become cool now because of data analytics, but for the most part, the Agile community doesn't have a clue when it comes to data. Similarly, the data community doesn't have a clue when it comes to Agile. Like they just don't. They don't know what they're talking about, and they're wrong. The data people are completely wrong, completely and utterly wrong. Like there is no room for discussion with me about how wrong the data people are when it comes to Agile. They just don't have a clue, generally. So years ago, a bunch of us in the Agile community got together. I led the effort to work through how can data people work in an Agile manner. And this became the Agile Data Method, which is described reasonably well at agiledata.org. The pages are a little stale now, but they're still pretty solid. So we worked through techniques like database refactoring. we work through techniques like database testing. So basically, you know, if as a developer, as like a, you know, as an Agile developer, if you were to work through your technique stack of all the techniques that you use on a regular basis to do your job, like design and writing quality code and automated testing, continuous integration, refactoring, configuration management, basic fundamental, you know, the fundamental stack of techniques. You can put the word data or database in part of all those terms, and all those techniques are possible. You can do database testing. You can do database refactoring. You can do continuous database integration. You can develop good data designs. You can, it should be blatantly obvious, you can put all that under configuration management control. So it is possible. You can do Agile data modeling. All those things are possible if you know how to do them. And the problem is the vast majority of data people don't know how to do them, and they assume they can't. And and what you'll find, so this will be a good game to play with your data colleagues. The fundamental mistake that they've very clearly made in their mindset is they have an assumption that it is very difficult to change the schema or the contents of a production database. They're deathly afraid of that. And this is why there's so many data quality problems out there, because they get the designs wrong, or they get them right, but then the requirements change anyways, right? So and then it's all crap, or people misuse the databases and it's all garbage, right? This is why there's so many data quality problems out there. But the data community fundamentally assumes that it's like just part of their fundamental mindset that databases are hard to change. And to be fair to them, if you don't know how to do testing and if you don't know how to do refactoring, then yeah, they're really hard to change. Like, for those of us who've been around for a few decades, refactoring code in the mid-90s, that was a scary thing. Like renaming an operation, holy crow! Like that was a devastating thing to do. Now it's built into all the IDEs. It's absolutely trivial because we figured it out and we automated it. That's not the case in the data world. Like the techniques are there, they don't know how to use them for the most part. So yeah, so step back and just sort of poke around some of those data people, and you'll very quickly discover that they don't know how to change a production database. And when you don't know how to change a production database, then suddenly all these things that they do, like all this upfront design and all this upfront analysis that they do, all this like useless busy work for the most part, starts to make sense. But the problem is like once you show them, oh, here's how it's absolutely trivial to change a database. And I've done this in databases with hundreds of millions of rows in a single table, right? Like it's trivial. If you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, yeah, then that's a spectacularly bad mistake. But yeah, but they don't know how to do this. Is the challenge. So, but yeah, the techniques are there. But explore that with them, and you'll discover that the people that tell you the data people that tell you they can't be agile, they're the ones. There's two fundamental reasons. That it'll be they don't understand how to change a production database, or they believe that they have to do onerous amounts of data analysis to explore the entire domain before they can make any sorts of decisions. And that's complete and that is almost always derived from, I got to get it right up front because we're totally screwed if we ever get it wrong because we can't change the database. And that is the fundamental mental problem with these data people. And this is I've been working on this for decades. So as you can probably tell, I have exactly zero tolerance for data people telling me they can't be agile. I've never seen it, by the way. I have never, ever, ever seen a situation where the data was so complex that I couldn't be agile. And I've worked in some really nasty situations. And yeah, sometimes took us a while to figure it out. But yeah, I've never, ever seen a situation where you couldn't do it, ever. Maybe I will. Maybe I will.
Yeah,
I've actually run into situations
AgileData.org.
where you couldn't do agile, and then I discovered people that were doing agile. I attended for years. I always used the excuse of, I don't know how to be agile. If I had to put somebody on Mars, I probably wouldn't do it in an agile manner. And then I ran into the leader of the team that landed one of the big rovers a few years ago on Mars. It was like a ton, like this incredibly huge, like for a space probe, incredibly heavy and big thing. And they used Agile techniques to figure it out. The traditional techniques failed miserably, and they had to go Agile in order to be effective. It was a truly awesome thing, and which totally messed me up for an experiment, for an example for when I wouldn't be Agile. I don't have one now, actually. I don't have one. I'll find one eventually, but
thanks, Scott.
Yeah.
But just to remember, sometimes the problem is just not where we are looking for. For instance, the problem with the COVID database that was a Excel spreadsheet, they replaced columns and rows, and so sometimes it's even we do not know where is the problem. It's not about Agile; it's about technical skills. And I really would like to reinforce: without technical skills, we cannot do anything. We need technical skills, and then we can do Agile or what other things, and we can continuously improve. And this is the big message. We can continuously improve, and we continuously improve even in a better way. So it's it was really a great talk, Scott. I really appreciate.
Oh, thank you.
And it was really amazing. We were really happy to have you here. We were not personally in Brazil, but next time maybe.
Next time, yeah. Like I said, I love going to Brazil. It's a wonderful country, and hope to get back.
And
I will get back.
Welcome.
Okay.
So, I would like to thank you again, and would like to congratulate for your talk. It was really amazing. It was amazing. We are really, really happy about it. And so, hope to see you next time, Tom. And thank you again very, very much.
Thank you very much. Have a great evening, everybody.
Bye-bye, Scott. See you.
Bye-bye.